But diving into that Thursday night game, week one, you could say was kicked off right.
Yeah.
Ohio State, again, 45, Minnesota 31. It was a shaky start for Ohio State. Stroud was 8 of 14 with 0 touchdowns and interception in the first half. Ohio State's defense kind of looked like the Ohio State defense of last year, gave up some yards on the ground, but also had some struggles in the pass game with the ball going over their head, which we've seen a little bit. But you flip it to the second half, and Stroud went 5 of 8 for 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, which is kind of what we expect now out of Ohio State offenses. Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson were both big in the run game. It was Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson that were big at running back. Nearly 500 total yards of offense for the Buckeyes. But you got to give Minnesota a lot of credit in that game. 408 yards of offense. Tanner Morgan threw for 205 and a touchdown. Mo Ibrahim was literally killing Ohio State before he left the game, 163 rushing yards, and he was injured in the third quarter. So that could have easily been a 200-yard rushing game for him. And then they held CJ Stroud to 58 passing yards before OSU's third quarter explosion for 21 points. Big takeaways from that game, Hat.
Yeah, I think we were spot on with Minnesota coming into that game and how they managed their game plan. Just talking about controlling the clock, running the football, dominating the line of scrimmage, and not letting Ohio State offensively really get in a rhythm. And especially with a young quarterback, I thought that was big. And that was something that allowed them to stay in it. And really, I mean, they led at halftime. Am I correct? So like really, really, put a really strong showing in that first half. I think defensively, Minnesota, I didn't think they tackled great. I think they gave up a few bonehead plays that ended up being explosive plays, coverage, busted coverages. And ultimately, when you play a team like Ohio State, you can't have those mistakes. You can't have those things happen. Even if it's a young team, even if they have a young quarterback, the talent on that roster, top to bottom, is going to make you pay for those things. So just looking at it, I was thoroughly impressed with how Ohio State responded in a hostile environment for the youth on that team, especially at quarterback. I thought Stroud settled in, made some throws in the second half. I thought he looked a little shaky early, but we've all been there. We know what that's like, the pressure. Starting your first game, you definitely have some jitters. So I think by no means does this put Minnesota out of anything. The Mo Ibrahim injury, I think, is going to be a concern, but I thought that they still were able to run the football. And I think that offensive line moving forward, they're going to, but just personally, that sucks for Mo. I thought I really like that kid. I love the way he runs. I think he can be a special guy. So I'm wishing a speedy recovery for him on a more sentimental note. But that was kind of my analysis of it. And I'm curious to see you dive in a little bit because I know you're going to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Before the game, we pretty much predicted what this, at least the ebb and flow of the game was going to feel like. It's a young quarterback on the road Thursday night, ended up being some weather. So the offense wasn't going to be perfect early on. And Ohio State defensively was going to have their struggles. And on the flip side of that, we both had a lot of respect for this Minnesota team coming in, probably more so than some of the talking heads nationally. And so this wasn't just going to be a cakewalk for the Buckeyes. You knew this Minnesota team was going to fight, and that's exactly what we saw. I 100% agree with you. When you evaluate Minnesota, there were too many coverage busts for a team that was going to already be at a disadvantage just in terms of the athletes that they had to face. I agree with you on that 100%. When you're playing a team that is more talented, has more speed, whatever the case is in you cannot afford to hurt yourself with mistakes like that. And Minnesota is always going to be a pretty well-coached team that's not going to have a ton of penalties. And so it's going to come down to the mental aspect just in terms of how they play football to solve that. So I thought that was really good analysis there. And I will go out on saying this about this Minnesota team. Losing Mo definitely hurts, like you said. They feel like they've got running backs, though, just in terms of depth. And the hard thing about those guys is they haven't had a ton of reps because Mo was the guy getting all the carries. But PJ feels like it's a very talented room. And you mentioned that big physical offensive line. I personally just, as I look at what the Big Ten West is going to be this year, would not be surprised if this is a rematch in the Big Ten championship game. I have that much respect for this Minnesota team. And you almost feel like this is a team that's going to rally after losing kind of their heartbeat of their offense. You know, that's just kind of what PJ's teams do. So this will be really unique. And then we're going to kind of dive into, in the last segment, the big games of the week. But I think for Ohio State, there's I think a lot to build off of, but I also think there are some things that make you nervous, because as I watched the back end of Ohio State's defense, I think I saw more of the same issues that popped up from a year ago, where when the ball is in the air, I'm not exactly sure that they're great at defending it. And you mentioned how you thought Minnesota missed a lot of tackles. I tend to agree with that. Ohio State was poor tackling as well, especially in the first half of the game. I mean, you know, Mo is a tough running back, but he was constantly falling forward. He was constantly running through arm tackles. And it really wasn't until the second half that I saw Ohio State finally finish a tackle, knocking a guy backwards. And that's, I mean, it can't take you a half to get started there. So be really curious, but this was, I think, the game that we wanted to see. I thought it was super exciting, and it just kicked everything off right on a Thursday night.
Yeah, for sure. I think for Ohio State, it's a good win to get under their belt. And I haven't really paid as much. I paid attention to defenses, but I haven't paid attention just to defensive execution as a player, because I'm worried about looking at what guys can do, who I can take advantage of, tendencies, things of that nature. And I feel like for Ohio State, having played that physical of a game early is going to pay big dividends for them throughout the season.
For sure.
Just from even a tackling standpoint, it's one of those things where it's hard to explain unless you've played it. But I think just feeling it, getting that out of the way, and now having the opportunity to go into a schedule where after this week, you're going to have some opportunity to start building some steam and some momentum with some lesser opponents and gain some more confidence.
Hack, I think that's a really good point, though. Just in terms of the feeling it aspect. Because of the way that training camps are done right now, like nobody's really that physical during camp. And part of it's because of the rules, but the other part of it is everybody's got these genius sports science guys on their staff that tell you about load management and everything else.
Yeah.
And so I think it was kind of an epidemic across college football that nobody knew how to tackle in week one. And I think that's just a part of the way that the game is going to be. I think it's going to take people a little time to ramp up. I'm not a fan of it. I think the only way to learn how to tackle is to tackle, but I also don't think it is necessarily a hard skill to develop, because you can do it in ways that you don't have to have big collisions. And I also think that a lot of tackling issues are solved if guys run to the ball and finish during practice, which I think is also an epidemic in college football, where guys are too cool to finish at the ball. Neither here nor there. It's me being an old guy, get off my lawn. But it'll be curious to see. But I think that's a really good point. Like, guys are gonna have to feel their way through this for a little bit.
Yeah,